Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
He must keep his America, we will keep our South Africa.
And shut up, you stay nation and listen. National Conference of the governing party. This approach will include the expropriation of land without compensation.
We will expropriate land without compensation, whether they like it or not. If they object, they can seek refugee in America.
We're having a problem with
being
land.
We are going to
The
community leader says he's been able to identify one of the people involved in the attempted land grab.
I know him because he's a member of the ANC in Ward 135.
Private property rights under threat in South Africa, race laws targeting specific groups, an ambassador expelled from the United States. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of news around South Africa for the past month or so, and all of this specifically surrounding posts and actions by Donald Trump and his administration regarding South Africa. There's been a lot of talk of misinformation, lies and disinformation, whatever word you want to use. But a lot of this has just been narrative, not a lot of facts. The question remains, is Donald Trump right about South Africa? Let's look at the facts, not the narratives. Racially discriminatory legislation in post-1994 South Africa started as early as 1998 with the Employment Equity Act, which mandates strict racial representation in all occupational levels of the workforce. The broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act of 2003 further laid the groundwork for decades of racially divisive, discriminatory policies which fall under the misleading banner of Black Economic Empowerment, or BEE. More than 2 decades later, instead of empowering the poor, the only thing these new racially discriminatory policies have achieved has been worsening race relations, a new group excluded based on their skin color, and the creation of a new elite class of those with the right political connections. Racial criteria and quotas have been forced into every facet of South African society by the government. In 2022, an internal memorandum was leaked from South Africa's second largest retail pharmacy chain called Dis-Chem, in which its CEO announced a moratorium, a total freeze, on the appointment and promotion of white people due to the threat of severe government fines. The 2020 Tourism Relief Fund used the racial composition of a business's ownership as criteria to determine whether struggling small businesses qualified for relief funds. Fortunately, the civil rights organization AfriForum and labor union Solidarity were able to defeat this discriminatory fund in court. In 2023, a policy of race quotas for agricultural water use was published in the Government Gazette. Even though South Africa is still struggling with catastrophic rolling blackouts as we speak, the state power monopoly Eskom has retrenched many white maintenance workers over the years, as well as hired based on race rather than merit to meet government race quotas. Even primary school level sport is affected by the government's race-mad agenda. In 2019, evidence revealed that several white children at the Gauteng province's netball trials between the ages of 12 and 18 had not been selected simply because of the color of their skin. Also in 2019, qualifying white athletes as young as 9 years old were almost left behind because South African schools athletics declared that only one white child per team would be allowed to represent their province at the national championships. In 2023, an under-16 rugby team was disallowed from playing in a major tournament's main game because the last-minute injuries meant that they no longer met the strict race quotas. Students at South African universities are registered on a racial quota basis. In many cases, there are different admission requirements for different races. It does not stop there. When the Tears Foundation, a non-profit organization that fights sexual and gender-based violence, applied for funding from the government, the organization was expected to meet Black Economic Empowerment, or BEE, racial criteria, which then served as a clear barrier to them acquiring funding. In 2025, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition tabled a plan to expropriate 3% of annual net profit after tax from businesses for a new 100 billion rand racially discriminatory transformation fund that will exclude white-owned businesses based on race. The South African government is currently refusing to grant Elon Musk's Starlink a license to operate in South Africa because SpaceX does not meet the ANC's racial ownership requirements. In 2025, South Africa remains the only Southern African country without Starlink or even a launch date. Even Zimbabwe got Starlink before South Africa. Let that sink in. I am now joined by Martin van Staden, the head of policy at the Free Market Foundation and the researcher behind the Race Laws Index of the Institute of Race Relations. Martin's goal with the Race Laws Index was to document all the different race laws that have been on the books in South Africa since 1910 and in the post-1994 era. Martin, welcome to the program, and I want to talk to you today about specifically race laws in South Africa. You seem to be the foremost expert on it. How many race laws are there in South Africa? That seems to be the big question everyone is asking, and some people have tried to answer that question. You are one of them.
A race law is any act of parliament that makes or recognizes someone's race, ethnicity or skin color as legally relevant in any form. That counts as a race law, and there are 314 acts of parliament since 1910 that have been adopted that fit that bill. There was a big repeal initiative in the 1990s, which brought us down to 52 race laws total in South Africa in the year 1996. That is the floor of race law in South Africa. We've never had fewer than that since 1910. But since 1994, the Democratic Parliament, the mostly ANC-led parliament, has adopted 117 race laws. Now that is 37% of all the race laws ever adopted. Now that, to me, that's an astoundingly large number. The three main numbers: 314 race laws total since 1910, 117 since 1994, and 142 on the books as applicable law today.
And then when it comes to the racial classification system that you encounter on a daily basis in South Africa, whenever you are interacting with the government in any form, I mean, even in a scenario where you are in a car crash or you are the victim of a horrific crime, when you go fill in the police report, one of the first questions is, what is your race? Can you give us a bit more of a clear picture? Where does this race classification come from, and why is it still in operation?
That was formalized in the year 1950 when the Population Registration Act was adopted. That is the first time that there was a systemic classification of South Africans' population groups according to race. That system introduced 4 categories, which every few years went by a different name, but basically white, black, colored, and Indian. That act was the kind of foundation of the so-called apartheid era race laws, and it was repealed. It was taken off the statute books in the year 1991. From the year 1991 in South Africa, there has been no formal system of race classification. We were returned to the pre-1950 system of, you'll know it when you see it. And in the view of a constitutionalist like myself, that is highly irregular, highly illegal, for something to be made legally relevant, your race, without there being a definition of what that is. So currently, the kind of basic, or the closest thing you have to a race classification system in South Africa that's formally defined is the 1998 Employment Equity Act, which is applied specifically to kind of affirmative action of the in the workplace of your workforce, not your management or your ownership, but of your workforce. But that kind of system has been extended to all of race law, essentially and by implication, and that talks about black people. So, and black people means Africans, coloreds and Indians, and white people is not defined, and none of those terms are defined, except black people means Africans, coloreds and Indians. And that's essentially, to some degree, the Population Registration Act reenacted into our law, by implication.
I think you'll agree that when it comes to, if a white South African were to fill in that he identifies as black on his application to that job that has been explicitly put out on racially exclusionary lines, he would not qualify.
No, and he might even be prosecuted for fraud, for malicious compliance with the law.
One of the other absurdities that came to the fore that a lot of people, especially Americans, don't believe when I tell them is the fact that South African citizens of Chinese descent qualify as black under black economic empowerment legislation, and that's true, right?
Yes, yeah. So in essence, what the Employment Equity Act's categories mean is that anyone except a white person is effectively a black person. Black is almost used as a synonym for disadvantage.
And it has created the absurd scenario where the child of a rich politician, a black politician, would qualify for a black economic empowerment bursary or job or any type of benefit from the government on racial lines, but the son of an unemployed white person would not qualify for this type of benefit.
No, exactly. It's really an absurd. The whole premise of race law in South Africa currently is completely absurd. It didn't come out of nowhere because the intellectuals from the 1990s, they said that this is what they wanted, and yeah, that's what it comes down to. It's very much in my view, a totalitarian project of social engineering that has very little to do with solving real, tangible social problems.
And when it comes to the 21st century South Africa, I mean, when people look back on the 20th century, they identify race-based exclusion from employment in America and in South Africa as some of the worst human rights violations of the previous century. But this is a reality in 21st century South Africa. It's not an exaggeration to say that whites need not apply. It's a reality in many job application scenarios in South Africa.
Of course, yeah, and it's always coded language, which is you can see the companies understand that what they are doing is fundamentally immoral, because they say this is an employment equity position or this is a BEE position. I mean that doesn't even make sense, but that is the kind of wording that companies use when they advertise positions, and that just means actually if you're white, don't apply. Most systems of oppression that are notable today in history started by identifying wealthy and easily identifiable minorities and targeting them in law, and then gradually escalating that targeting. It gets worse, and BEE in South Africa is getting far worse than it was 20 years ago, far more invasive. Someone was born in a way that they had no control over, and the state decided that that will be a legally relevant fact. You are born black then, you are born white today, and therefore certain disabilities will be imposed on you by law, and you can do absolutely nothing about it. That is a textbook definition of unfair. After 1994, the most common race provision that makes a law a race law is the notion of representativity. So this is when the government establishes a committee or a commission or a board for an institution, let's say for instance the board of the National Weather Service, in terms of the Weather Service Act. That provision says that when this board is appointed by the minister must take into account the need for that board to reflect the demographics of South Africa. This principle is stated in various different ways across many different laws, but ultimately that comes down to it must be a mostly black board with certain positions in theory for racial minorities. This is the type of provision that makes out most of the 117 post-apartheid race laws. The real harm that is done by race law after 1994 comes in the form of really a small handful of laws that one can easily name, and I think all of that flows out of the very important 2003 Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. This single law flows into many other laws, and it has dozens of policies and regulations in terms of it as well. But effectively up to now, and it is changing now, it has been voluntary, this much abused word of voluntary, that if you as an enterprise want to do business with the South African government or any kind of municipal or provincial government, then you must score high in terms of your BEE points in terms of this act. Now, how do you score high on this thing? You must change your share ownership. It must be more transformed, more black. But then also the Employment Equity Act flows into this. Your workforce must be transformed, and that will give you more BEE points. Now, the reason this is so problematic is that your suppliers must also score highly on BEE for your points to be higher, and this is actually ingenious. It's very, very smart of the racial engineers of modern South Africa, because it's a cascading effect, it's a snowball, whereby you as a small business somewhere, a family business even, you think, well, I don't want to do business with the state. I'm going to employ my son, my cousin, and some people from the local community, and we're just going to do our thing. But the moment you supply a bigger business, which is supplying a bigger business, which is supplying a bigger business that wants to do business with the state, that cascading effect is going to come to you, and someone is eventually going to ask you, what is your BEE score? Otherwise, we can't do business with you because we need to up our score. And through that way, BEE has basically voluntarily become an aspect of all sectors in the economy. So some of this is simply not voluntary at all, and hasn't been. So the big example, a big example is mining in South Africa. If you want to mine in South Africa or do anything in that sector, like prospecting and so on, you have to be high on the BEE point score system. Otherwise, you simply cannot get a license or a permit to engage in economic activity in that sector. The other thing how BEE is changing today is around real estate. There are rules around registering as a real estate agent, and that enables you to sell residences. And there's a question, I don't know if the question has been answered yet, about even private homeowners who want to now sell their houses themselves would also, in terms of this law, qualify as estate agents because you're selling a house. And you cannot engage in economic activity in that sector unless you have these racial criteria satisfied according to the government's BEE score system. Third wave BEE, which is to say that if you want to participate in any economic activity in this country, you have to have a high BEE score. The newest race law in South Africa is the Public Procurement Act. Now, this is for companies that want to bid for contracts from the state to provide services. Like if the state wants to build a bridge, and they need to find out which construction company is going to build the bridge now. Various companies are going to come to them and say, let me do it, or let me do it. And the new Public Procurement Act says that if your company gets a head start in the bidding process or gets an advantage for consideration according to your BEE score, according to your BEE points, that is one part of it. The other part of it is, in some cases, if you do not score a certain amount of BEE points, you do not get to bid. So don't even approach us. Stay away. So it's actually it excludes companies. So even if you're the best engineers and builders in the country, you provide the best service for the lowest price, but you do not qualify in terms of the racial thresholds that are set by the regulations in terms of the law, then you just can't. The door is closed to you entirely. Very problematic for a country that has very little infrastructure investment like South Africa. Very problematic for a country where basic services are denied to the vast majority of people who need quality services at an affordable price. The state is pushing those prices up, pushing the quality down in many cases, just so that it can satisfy some racial criteria. Now, these laws, the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, the Employment Equity Act, the Public Procurement Act, and the Competition Act, in my view, makes it that if you're a company of any size in the economy, in the South African economy, at some point you are going to have to make a decision based on race. You just cannot escape it. You are not allowed to be a non-racial business owner in this country. At some point you're going to have to make a determination that has to be commercial or civic or moral, but usually economic, you're going to have to bring in someone's racial identity into that determination. So that, in my view, really encapsulates what the solidarity movement calls rasmoheid, race madness in this country. And that's why I think, really, race law is, and just these four laws are total. They are totalitarian. They are inescapable. In South Africa, you can go nowhere where you are safe from the state's racial engineering imperatives. We are 31 years into this dispensation of race law, the new dispensation of race law, and still we are told that the economy is untransformed, which means it is too white, and yet we've had hundreds of race laws. The laws I've just mentioned have been on the books for decades, except the Public Procurement Act, which replaced the previous race law from 2000. So it's also been, in effect, on the books for decades. It has not worked. Now, the conclusion that the government is reaching, that the political class is reaching, that the rent seekers are reaching is, well, we have to do more of it. It hasn't worked, so let's try harder with this model that doesn't work. BEE and employment equity regulations, you distort that market entirely. You create huge uncertainty, especially for international investors who actually have no idea what this is all about and why they should now transform their own management committees according to South African racial criteria. So you just create economic chaos.
The ANC has a track record of threatening private property rights and expressing a desire to expropriate property without compensation. Don't believe me? Let them speak for themselves. In 2018, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that the ANC had officially resolved to amend the constitution to explicitly allow for land expropriation without compensation. In 2021, this amendment to Section 25, the private property rights section of the Constitution, failed to pass in the National Assembly. In December 2021, after the ANC's attempt to amend the Constitution failed, then Minister of Justice Ronald Lamola stated, and I quote, "Changing the Constitution was just one instrument we could have used. The matter is now ended. We will now use our simple majority to pass laws that will allow for expropriation without compensation." End quote. Lamola was referring to, among other things, the expropriation bill. President Ramaphosa echoed these sentiments when he had stated in a 2022 address that, and I quote, "The ANC will implement its resolution on the expropriation of land without compensation despite the refusal of other parties in Parliament." End quote. The expropriation bill, which the President of South Africa signed into law in 2025, which is now an act, enabled expropriation with nil compensation, which is simply another way of saying no compensation. The act also empowers any state organ or department to expropriate any private property. This power is not limited to land. Recently, many legal experts and analysts tried to gaslight the public by arguing that nil compensation does not mean no compensation. The ANC, however, has made it crystal clear about what they understand nil compensation to mean. In 2024, Deputy President Paul Mashatile reaffirmed the government's commitment to expropriation of land without compensation, specifically through the use of the Expropriation Act. On the matter of without compensation and nil compensation, the Deputy President said that the intention was the same and the difference was wording. In his words, I quote, "It may well be that you have issues with the wording thereof, but the intention is to achieve exactly that we need to expropriate land without compensation where applicable." End quote. Mashatile continued, and I quote, "We use the words in the Act that we should expropriate land if it is in the public interest. This issue of nil compensation I will look at, but my sense is nil compensation is you don't pay." End quote. In a 2023 address by President Ramaphosa, the matter of the Expropriation Act enabling expropriation without compensation was again emphasized. The President said, and I quote, "We will pass the expropriation bill and will grant the state the authority to expropriate land for public purposes or interests and established that nil or 0 rand compensation will be deemed just and equitable in accordance with the law." End quote. The same ANC to this day praise Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe and his party ZANU-PF as heroes. There have been multiple land grabs in South Africa since the signing of the Expropriation Act in 2025, with senior government officials and local politicians on scene as facilitators and beneficiaries.
The group says they've been waiting for years for the government to address the issue of land reform. They say the new Land Expropriation Act, signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa, allow them to take over pieces of land not in use.
This program of land grab to take the land without compensation has been there in the Freedom Charter long ago.
On the 19th of February 2025, the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development announced that the Equitable Access to Land Bill will be tabled in 2025. This bill will seek to force the redistribution of land on a racial basis. This continued radicalization and racialization of land by the South African government simply serves to prove the Trump administration right, when it expressed concerns about private property rights and racially targeted legislation in South Africa. I will now be joined by Theo de Jager, the head of SAI, the South African Agriculture Initiative, and he's going to tell us a bit more about the threat to private property rights in South Africa, specifically through legislation like the Expropriation Act. You were removed Stalin style from a government communication, from a photograph. Can you just give us that story to paint the picture of what type of figure you are within this whole debate? Because you seem to be a bit of a threat to the government's narrative.
It's all about property rights, and it's all about the new legislation here in South Africa, which makes it possible for government on any level, on national level, on provincial level, even on municipal level, to expropriate property at less than market-related compensation, even at nil compensation. And as farmers, we are in the front ranges. It's our property they want to take. And for that reason, we have been very vocal when this shockwave hit us. And we became very unpopular for that. We were attacked from government side, from a number of institutions, some media outlets who said that we are exaggerating, that we are fear-mongering. And we kept on asking all the questions. We want to know how it will work. And then the next thing, Media 24 reported that the minister has distanced himself from me and from us as an organization because of our position on expropriation at nil compensation. But the minister denied it. He personally wrote me a message to say this is really not true. I'm behind you guys. And then the next thing, there was this photograph. I was on it. It was taken in our embassy in Berlin, and I stood right behind the minister. On his invitation, he invited me to join him to Berlin, where I was photoshopped out. So we cannot be less vocal, we must be more vocal, and we cannot be scared off by this kind of action.
I thought this was something you only read about in 1984, where people are photoshopped out of photographs by the government as if they don't exist, just because they dared to go against the narrative, the state-approved narrative.
Yeah, I have spoken to literally hundreds of farmers from Cape Town to Messina and from Durban to Port Nolloth. Smallholders, big mega farmers, poor farmers, wealthy farmers, black farmers and white farmers. If you don't have a title deed on farmland, you don't have collateral to offer to a bank, then you don't have access to financing. We have today around 4,800 South African and Zimbabwean commercial farmers farming in 44 countries in Africa. I do not know all of them, but I know most of them. I can tell you all of them are using their South African property as collateral to access the financing for their fertilizer and their seed and their diesel and their mechanization, wherever they farm up in Africa. So this is more than just certainty of ownership. A title deed market-related compensation in a forced acquisition. That security of value is also the very basis of the free market system. It's the cornerstone of collateral. It is upon what we build competitive agriculture, and that is what is being eroded now.
How would you explain how this act specifically threatens private property rights in South Africa to that person who's curious but who doesn't have time to go read a report?
Any tier of government can expropriate here. It's not only our national government. It is also our notoriously corrupt second tier of government, the provincial authorities, the various departments on that level. And then any municipal official can also expropriate. And you know what's the extent of our problems on that level. So why wouldn't a radical politician on a municipal level try to test the boundaries of what he can do? And the problem on our side is the farmer must fight from his own pocket against it, whilst government on all these tiers fight with taxpayers' money.
In a court system that takes years to finalize to get to a result. I mean, last time I checked, I talked to AfriForum's legal team and they said the earliest court date that you will be able to get at the moment in the High Court is 2028. And that's the start of your case, not the end of your case. Then that case will be postponed, all types of obstacles will be in the way, it will take years to complete. That's the first leg. Then it's going to it's going to go to the Supreme Court of Appeal, which is more years of court battles. Then when it's concluded there, it will definitely go to the Constitutional Court as well. That's another court battle. This is years upon years, and during all that time, you're deprived of your property, and you're paying out of your own pocket for this fight.
The counter-argument is, the first one they say, government will not do it because they are sensitive to investment confidence. Now, if a government would not do it, why do you pass an act like this? They pass
why
it
do you
so
give
that
yourself
they can
power
do it.
you will definitely not use?
It gives government all these discount clauses, but it does not say how much discount government can take. And our position is, what's wrong with market-related compensation? Why do you want to put the burden for a national imperative on the shoulders of an individual citizen? It is simply not just. And then there's this argument that we need to speed up land reform. For 30 years, we have not made much progress. Now, you see, these land reform programs, all three of them, have been designed for corruption. They've been abused. We have seen the most horrible kinds of corruption in this process. The reason why land reform is not working has nothing to do with the willing seller principle. It has nothing to do with market-related compensation. It has to do with cadre deployment, with self-enrichment, with nepotism, and with the kind of inept which you can only imagine. Government sits with about 2.7 million hectares of good farms in its possession at the moment. And by its own account, 90% of it has failed. Why not start there, rectify that, get people on that land who has been prepared and trained and mentored to be profitable beneficiaries of land reform.
A lot of the people supporting expropriation without compensation lie by omission. They say, well, other countries have these acts as well. But those acts don't allow expropriation without compensation. But in the South African context, there's this very dishonest argument that the expropriation bill talks about nil compensation, but that does not mean no compensation. Can you shed some light on what's going on here? Is it wordplay, or is there actually a difference?
You are asking the wrong man. I represent the farmers, and for us, whether we are expropriated without compensation or at nil compensation, it's exactly the same thing. You walk out naked. So the average farmer owes the banks and the cooperatives more or less 55 to 60% of the value of his farm. That's what the farm is on for security. Which means if we are expropriated at 60% of the value of our farms, the bank will be covered and the cooperative will be covered, but the farmer will walk out naked. This is why it is so important for us that we are compensated with market-related values.
Theo, there's been a lot of claims out there in regards to land grabs in South Africa. Many government officials, some commentators and analysts saying, and I quote, "There are no land grabs happening in South Africa." What, as you as a representative of farmers in South Africa, a farmer yourself, is there truth in that claim?
Media 24 wrote a letter to Minister John Steenhuisen in which they told him that I'm the one who claims that there are widespread land grabs. I've never said that. There's also this narrative out there that it's AfriForum, Solidarity, who are fear-mongering and who say we have these large-scale land grabs. And I have not heard them saying it there nowhere, but that there are land grabs. That cannot be wished away. Only yesterday, there was this land grab in East London, where government officials sold land stands at 15 to 25,000 rand a stand. 2 weeks ago, not far from my farm, we had these two incidents in Seshego. Mobs simply took what they say is unused properties. Now, actually, it's wildlife farms and cattle farms. And then, of course, we have those cases who are currently in court or where we had court cases, such as the building on the farm in Heidelberg, which is used for a mortuary. Plaaswerf Beleggings was the owner. But he leased out this building to the Department of Health in Gauteng. And when they stopped paying their rent, he chucked them out. And when he succeeded, they simply expropriated him without paying him anything. And that case is at the moment in court. It already come for 4 years. And as you say, it takes long for this process to go through the courts. And then we have the classical example of Ackerland in 2018, where the owner was expropriated at about 25% of the value of his land. And after we won that case, he could sell it on the open market for 4 times more than the expropriated value. There's enough reason to be concerned. Do you need widespread land grabs before you get concerned? In SAI, we are also by far the largest representative of farmers in Zimbabwe. Both the white farmers who lost their land since 2000 and the Matabele farmers who lost their land already 15 years before in the ZANU action against the Matabele communities. And we feel we have seen this movie before. We know how it starts, and we know how it unfolds, and we know how it ends. Now, I will not say that we are on the same trajectory as Zimbabwe, but we definitely also do not have any guarantees that we will not land up on the same trajectory. And some of the red lights which are flickering is the way it starts. In Zimbabwe, they never decided that now's the time to grab the land. It was not government initiated. And the then Mugabe government, they had a very simple option. Either they could act against it and estrange themselves from their own constituency, or they could ride the tiger. And they decided on the latter. And look where that country is now. The other thing which is a red light flickering is we also had these voices for farmers and for business who said, this is not so bad. It's only isolated examples of where things could go. Let's work harder to support government. And all of them ended up losing their land. You must stick to the principles. The principles are clear. It's an international agreement. It's all there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in which the property rights clause is abundantly clear. If we don't play by those rules, who are we to hope that the West, that the USA, should not act against us? We must stick to the rules.
In addition to all these issues discussed, thousands of South African farmers have been the victims of horrific attacks and murders over the years, often involving brutal torture and nothing being stolen. They are also the targets of incitement of violence through chants like "kill the boer, kill the farmer" and "one settler, one bullet" by high-profile politicians, as well as dehumanizing, villainizing rhetoric.
Shoot to kill them, kiss the poor, the farmer, kiss the poor, the farmer.
In 2018, the South African president traveled to the United States and denied that farm murders exist.
There are no killings of farmers or white farmers in South Africa.
Prominent politician and Member of Parliament Julius Malema echoed this denialism in 2020 at a counter-protest to a farm murders protest, where his supporters chanted "kill the boer, kill the farmer" outside of a court proceeding where the alleged murderers of a 21-year-old farm manager who was hung on a pole were being tried.
There is no farm murders in South Africa. There are no white farmers being killed.
During his 2022 trial, referring to past comments of his where he said, "We are not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now," Julius Malema was asked whether he would pledge under oath that he would never call for the slaughtering of white people. Malema immediately refused. When Malema was asked whether it would be him in the future who would indeed make such a call, he testified under oath that he might call for the slaughtering of white people in the future. He could not rule out the possibility.
You are not ruling out that in the future you may very well call for the slaughter of white people.
It may not be me.
Could it be you?
It could be me, yes, but it may not be me.
Yeah, so it could be you. You could, at some future date, call for the slaughter of white people.
What will necessitate that?
You tell me.
I don't know. Why would I do that?
You've said you could do it in the future, is that correct?
I can't guarantee that I can't do it or I won't do it.
So right now,
so I'm not ruling out that possibility.
If I asked you to pledge to say, I will never call for the slaughter of white people, would you make that pledge?
I will do it with ease.
Make that pledge.
Why would I do that?
I'm asking you to make that pledge.
I
will do it.
I won't do it.
Make the pledge.
I won't do it.
You won't do it?
Yes.
I understand.
The South African government has also taken aim at mother tongue education for Afrikaners and other minority groups through pushing out of Afrikaans at all South African universities and through the newly signed Bella Act, which seeks to marginalize Afrikaans education all the way down to primary school level. In 2016, Julius Malema addressed his supporters saying, and I quote, "We are not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now. The right owners of the land are black people.
We are not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now."
In 2016, Velaphi Khumalo, an ANC member and employee of the Gauteng Provincial Department of the South African government, posted a message on Facebook in which he called for South Africa to be cleansed of white people. He stated that he wanted it to be done in the same manner that Adolf Hitler had targeted Jews. He also said that South African whites should be hacked and killed and skinned, and that their offspring must be used as garden fertilizer. Upon receiving many complaints from the public, the government department for which Khumalo worked temporarily suspended him and gave him a final written warning, valid for 6 months only, after which it would be removed from his record. In 2018, 7 days after Julius Malema said that the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay had to be removed from office because he was white, adding that we are cutting the throat of whiteness,
because the mayor of DA in PE is a white man. So these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man. But we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Deputy President David Mabuza publicly invited Malema to return to the ANC. And I quote, "We would love to have Julius Malema back in the ANC. He is still ANC down deep in his heart," the president said. In 2018, Andile Mngxitama, the leader of the party Black First, Land First at the time, addressed the crowd by demanding the following.
To kill one of us, we'll kill 5 of you. We'll kill the children, we'll kill the women, we'll kill anything that we find on our way. They kill one of us, we kill how many? They kill one of us, we kill how many? They kill one of us, we kill how many whites? We kill the children, we kill the women, we kill their dogs, we kill their cats, we kill anything.
He faced no consequences for this incitement, and in 2025, Andile is a member of the South African Parliament with the MK party. In 2023, a clip went viral online of Julius Malema chanting "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer" with a stadium of 100,000 supporters at the EFF's 10-year birthday celebration.
Shoot to kill the mother, kill the Boer, the farmer, kill the Boer, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa, brr, pa.
Well, there you have it. The facts regarding threats to private property rights in South Africa and racially discriminatory laws targeting specific groups in South Africa. Is Trump right about South Africa? You be the judge. If you want to support AfriForum and our facts-based analysis and our facts-based campaigns, you can become a member by following the link on the screen and the link in the description of this video. Thank you very much for watching. Share this video far and wide, and thank you very much for standing with AfriForum and the truth in regards to South Africa and those people fighting to make a real difference.